during the last 3 or 4 years, United Nations Organized Crime Office, UNODC, has been showing that drugs coming originally from Colombia, in order to avoid the role of the Mexican cartels, have actually channeled those drugs through West Africa and have bought off the leadership in places like Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, in order to get drugs moved from Latin America via West Africa to Europe. And several of the groups who were successfully operating in northern Mali and are still certainly part of the scene, including Al-Qaeda in the Sahel, AQM, and the Tuareg Liberation Front, have certainly been involved in that process. So there is a spillover between organized crime and political outcomes, which can only be described as something which is fueling corruption in a significant way. Then I want to move on in terms of a fourth driver to the role of multinationals. This is an area during the last 15 years, or maybe slightly more, where we've seen a huge amount of activity in terms of the international community trying to persuade, cajole, regulate multinationals in such a way that bribery would be diminished and preferably eliminated as a market force. And I would encapsulate this as saying that bribery, much of the last 30 or 40 years after World War II, let's forget the earlier period, has been much of a strategy for multinational corporations has been to use bribery to expand market share. As many of you will know, the US passed pioneering legislation in 1977, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and finally persuaded the rest of the OECD to pass the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention in 1997, 20 years later, which has had a significant impact. Susan may have a different interpretation. I like to be modestly optimistic